All right. Happy Friday, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for attending today's webinar session. I'm pleased to introduce a personal friend of mine, someone I've had the pleasure of working with over the last couple of years, Mr. Benny Walk Esquire, an attorney and the founder and CEO of Ink Pros. I formerly worked at WeFunder for a little context, and he was one of our best referral partners when it came to everything related to fundraising strategy, compliance, and everything related to crowdfunding. So Benny, without further ado, I am happy and pleased to give you the floor. Please tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we can dive on in and talk about the mechanics of crowdfunding.
Awesome, awesome. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone today. Like you said, my name is Benny Walk. I'm an attorney. I've been an attorney since 2011. I was an entrepreneur for many years before that, so that's definitely shaped, uh, I guess, my career as an attorney. I've always worked with other entrepreneurs and investors who focus on putting capital behind early stage entrepreneurs. I started Ink Pros in 2018. Ink Pros is a professional services firm. We work with entrepreneurs and investors that are building and buying companies and property. We provide support through entity formation, contract templates and review. We also do some trademark searching and registration. We provide back office support as well as overall strategic counsel. Ink Pros is a little bit different from a law firm in the sense that we don't provide legal advice. Our focus is on helping entrepreneurs and investors understand the full process. And of course, that does include some legal aspects to it, but we think that at this point, a lot of entrepreneurs and investors are very well informed about how they want to, start and grow whatever their enterprise may be. And we try to provide them with the services and expertise to support that. And as a professional services firm, we work with other attorneys, consultants, bankers, accountants, marketing folks, the full spread to make sure that entrepreneurs and investors are being connected to people who can actually help them to accomplish their goals. It's really difficult in the earlier stages or really all throughout to make sure you're working with people who can help you to accomplish your goal while also staying within budget and not putting you in a situation where you're spending a lot of time and effort to try to, accomplish certain tasks along your growth journey. So that's an area that we specialize in and plan to continue to grow with in the future.
Uh,
One of the things that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
so I was going to say, well, you go ahead and dive back in. My apologies.
Cool. Yeah. So one of the services that we provide is called an opportunity assessment. And this is something that we do for, potential clients on the intro stage and folks that we've been working with for a while, where we spend time with them actually being strategic or helping them to think strategically about whatever their particular opportunity is at the moment, and that tends to evolve, but we see ourselves as being a really strong thought partner that not only allows you to like kind of kick things, kick the tires and pick people's brains or whatever the popular phrase is at the time, but to really dig into like what you're doing and to help you to start the process of like actually doing what you need to do to take advantage of the opportunity that's in front of you. So one of the forms of doing this is like helping people to understand what it takes to raise a community round. Community rounds have become, well, so the term community round has become more popular, I would say, in the last year or two, courtesy of WeFunder. But equity crowdfunding has been around since 2016. So it's an opportunity for folks to raise capital from the crowd or retail or, just regular folks. And this is something that a lot of entrepreneurs and investors aren't really aware of, or they may have heard about it, but they don't have a lot of insight on like how to actually pull it off. So we do the assessment to one, help people to understand whether or not it's a good fit for what they're planning to do. And then if it does make sense for them to understand what it actually takes to do a community round.
So Benny, let me quickly ask, so it sounds like with Ink Pros, you're touching on a lot of different things from crowdfunding raises and or community rounds, along with general Reg D type fundraising. And it sounds like through this opportunity assessment, you work one-on-one with founders to identify the best route for them. Now, I see a lot of people here on the call. I've talked to a good chunk of y'all. A lot of folks have expressed interest in crowdfunding. But I think one thing that you're definitely not going to get by talking to these platforms is an honest read on whether or not this is a good read for you, because they all got sales quotas, right? So being able to leverage an objective third party, whether it be myself or Benny, we work, very well together. We have a lot of, history in the past. I think is helpful in understanding whether or not you can understand the risk associated with crowdfunding, whether or not you have the resources to launch a crowdfunding campaign, and whether or not you can determine whether it makes the most sense for your business strategically. So it sounds like that opportunity assessment touches on that. Benny, correct me if I missed anything, but just let me know.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. So, I mean, we'll kind of walk through it, but the focus of it is really to help people to know whether or not it makes sense for them, right? Like there's a ton of time and energy that's required to raise capital no matter which strategy you take, right? So, if you go Reg D, the traditional route where, you start out with friends and family, then move on to angels, then move on to more formal, funds or investors, that's one approach that takes a ton of time, but then a community round, it's a different approach, but it still is very involved. So we'll spend a lot of time just thinking through some of the major questions we think companies need to ask, before jumping into it.
Really excited for the presentation, man. I just wanted to quickly flag, you and I, we come from the crowdfunding space where there can be a little bit of jargon. Can you quickly touch on the difference between Reg D, Reg CF, some of the stuff we came up kind of talking about, for some
Yeah.
folks in the crowd who may not know the difference between the two?
Yeah. So, okay. So, thank you for saying that because I am, as an attorney, like I hear this stuff all the time. So I do kick around certain terms and phrases that is definitely jargon. So Reg D is Regulation D. So one more step back. Anytime you're raising capital, it's considered by the Securities and Exchange Commission as a securities raise. And anytime you're raising money by selling securities, you have to abide by certain rules and regulations. The traditional, I guess, popular regulation that most folks raise money under is Reg D. So if you know someone who's raised a pre-seed round using a SAFE or a convertible note, or someone who's raised a Series A or a seed round, more likely than not, that was done under Regulation A. And that's where you go and you raise money from what's called accredited investors, which is a very elaborate way of saying rich people. So in order to be an accredited investor, you have to have a net worth over a certain amount. I think it's like 300,000 or something north of that, but it's a much smaller pool of potential investors for you to be able to raise from. So just think about like, the angel investors that are in your town or folks who work at venture capital fund, as well as, if you know some folks in private equity, those are Reg D. Reg CF, regulation crowdfunding, is the regulation that governs the ability for folks to do an equity crowdfunding campaign. So most people are definitely familiar with Kickstarter, and I think at this point, GoFundMe. Those are donation platforms where you effectively make a contribution to either support someone's company or their cause, but there's no you aren't making an investment. You don't attain any rights to get anything back. It's just you basically giving money to someone who you want to support. Equity crowdfunding is a little bit different in the sense that it's an actual investment. So you're still doing it online. It's still happening through a platform, but it's done through, let's say, WeFunder or Republic or some of the other, big names that are out there where you run a campaign and people actually invest in the company. So if you raise using debt, then that means you're basically, they're loaning you money and you're going to pay them back on certain terms over a certain period of time, or you could be raising with the safe using crowdfunding, or you could be using equity. But either way, this allows you to raise capital from the crowd, which is also another way of saying just regular people everywhere, right? So there's no accredited investor test. Anybody, who can go online can invest in your company, which means there's a much larger pool of potential investors for you to go to. But the approach to it is different from, say, raising from an angel investor or a VC fund, because if you use Reg D, again, using jargon, and you raise from an angel, you may raise from, two or three or five even, angels in a fund, right? There's a very small number of people in that particular investment round. Whereas if you're doing equity crowdfunding, it could be 500, 1,000, 2,000. The more people you can get to support you, the better off you are because that means you can raise more money, So it's just a difference in approach in terms of the amount of people you go after. But yeah, legally, we have Reg D and Reg CF. So today, when we talk about community rounds, community rounds are equity crowdfunding campaigns. Uh-oh.
Really appreciate that, Benny. Excited to dive on in.
Yeah, and it's funny because in the presentation I left trying to leave a lot of the legalities out of it. But if folks have specific questions around just like the actual rules and regulations, feel free to put it in the chat and I'll try to take a look as I talk through. And if I don't catch it, then you can email me or we can get in touch to talk. So for the opportunity assessment for a community round, there are 5 key areas that I like to touch on. And I think with these 5 areas, it allows us to explore all of the major and a lot of the minor areas that you need to cover. Ordinarily, if we were doing an opportunity assessment the way I do them now, we do an intro and then we do what's called a 360, which is 3 60-minute sessions. I feel like that's enough time to give founders an opportunity to come into it fresh, ask a lot of questions, take some time, think, come back again with much more understanding around what they're getting into. And now we could work together to really drill down on whether or not it makes sense for them. And then the third session is about just like really getting them rolling towards which platform they'll use, beginning to put the profile together. So over the course of the sessions, our goal is to help folks to go from having like an introductory understanding of what it takes to run a crowdfunding campaign to actually being ready to what's called test the waters, which is something we'll talk about more in a second, but that's the, I guess, beginning phase of launching your campaign. So those 5 areas are invest in your community, calculate the target, build your profile, test the waters, and ultimately launch your campaign. So by investing in your community, you're running a crowdfunding campaign, right? So naturally, you want people to invest in you. But one of the big things that's different about equity crowdfunding is that you really have to get a lot of people to support you. And that takes much more time than I think folks initially understand, just because you're going from I mean, as founders, I'm sure you all understand that it's hard to get people to support your business, right? Like whether that's on a basic level to believe in what you're doing, right? I'm sure most folks had some tension or have some tension between folks saying like, oh, you shouldn't start your own company. You should keep doing whatever this other thing that they think you're fantastic at, right? Or they say like, oh, it's gonna be really hard. Like, how are you gonna you spend the entire time convincing people, well, convincing yourself first and then convincing other people to believe in what you're doing. Equity crowdfunding or community round is that times 1,000, right? Because go ahead, Ryan.
Benny, I wanted to touch on something. So, I mean, there's 2 things there. I think you're absolutely right. I think for one, there's a learning curve that people generally have to overcome in order to invest inside of a platform through crowdfunding. A lot of people are only familiar with general, public facing, companies that could be purchased via the stock market in terms of stock, right? So being able to explain the nuance around onboarding onto a platform and then how to trust it and all that stuff can be a byproduct. And the second thing that I kind of wanted to ask you about from a legal perspective, I know that when going through a campaign in the testing the waters phase, when you're with any of these platforms, you have to be very, very careful about your language, how you talk about the raise. Otherwise, you can get into legal trouble. So like while you're gauging the interest with your network, even in this super early stage, do you have any thoughts about how people should talk about the potential raise without getting into legal trouble? Or is that even a concern when it's super, super early on?
Yeah, I think so. I do think this is a concern. And so that kind of goes into what I mean by investing in your community, right? You have to like spend the time and the effort to take people up that learning curve to even understand what equity crowdfunding is, what your company does, what this investment is going to look like, how they'll be able to get a return in the future. It just requires a lot of hand holding, which is what we mean by investing, right? You have to invest yourself in building up this community of people to even have the opportunity to invest in you, right? So, even using just like some basic math, if you're trying to get 500 folks to invest in you, that means you need to have a community of 1,500 people, 2,000, more than that, meaning community being folks who you have the ability to reach, you have the ability to engage with, you have the ability over time to get them to believe in what you're doing. And in order to do that, you have to do things to get them to that point. So three hot topics that we like to cover are inclusivity, empowerment, and shared success. Inclusivity is the thing that we all ask for ourselves, right? We want to feel included. We want to feel like we're part of the thing that we're working with or supporting, right? The folks in your community need to feel included in the community, right? Like that's pretty standard for any healthy community. In order for them to feel that, you as the community leader, you as the CEO of this company, have to build an environment where they do feel included. And in this sense, it may be one to one, right? Folks who you reach out directly and just keep them up to date with how the company is doing. Maybe it's the folks who follow you on social. You know, you're constantly not just telling them what you do to make a sale, but you're also giving them information that they may find valuable. And of course, it needs to be tied to what you do as a business to maintain that authenticity. But it's like bringing them into the fold, right? Which goes into empowerment. As people begin to know more about what you're doing and they feel more conviction around, you becoming successful at some point, they feel empowered to go out and share with others, right? And again, these aren't always customers. These can be fans, brand ambassadors, your family, someone who just feels like, connecting folks is their mission in life. So they want you to know other people. You want people to feel included and you want them to feel empowered to go out and share your story. And that leads into shared success, right? Everyone being in this community and going out and pushing it, they get to share in the ultimate success of the business. Whether that's as someone who was supported but who may not have been able to make an investment, they get to share in seeing you grow over time. For folks who actually made an investment, they'll have the opportunity to share in the financial success of the business, right? So those are things that before we even get to, going down the road of actually launching a campaign, it's like, are you willing and capable of making a large investment to build up this community to at some point be able to raise from them?
Hi, my name's Rika Elise, and I'm the founder of Slay. We build smart mirrors for luxury retail. And one of the projects that we are embarking on in the fall is we are working with citizen schools in order to teach students how to build our smart mirrors, which we feel is like a direct connect to the community. However, we're lost about if it's actually an opportunity to do a crowdfunding situation because we are diving directly into impact and not just looking at the bottom line for us and selling more mirrors, but having the opportunity to actually teach youth within the community how to build these mirrors, and code these mirrors and etc. And I would love to get a little bit more of an idea about how to use that advocacy to mobilize a crowdfunding situation. Like you're talking about all the empowerment, inclusivity, and shared success, I feel like is a great like foundation of what we want to do, but we're not sure if it's a good opportunity to go for crowdfunding or if we should go find a nonprofit partner instead because of the legal grounds associated with fundraising.
Yeah, no, that
Does that
makes
make
sense.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally follow. So, and this is something that, Ryan from his experience with working on a ton of campaigns can absolutely speak to as well, but you know, companies that are impact based tend to do better, right? Because again, you're trying to build this large community of people to invest. And, of course, you can have thousands of customers, right? But usually it's not all customers who are investing because naturally you're charging customers already. You're already selling something to them. So even psychologically thinking like, where's our, and this, we kind of get to this in the next slide, but where's my community coming from, right? Who are these folks? If you're doing things in the community, and this is like just speaking to it like very plain, right? If you're doing things in the community, helping people, those people know who you are. Those people know what you do. Those people want you to continue to help in their community. If you taught my son how to make a mirror, I'd invest in what you're doing just because I want the lady who's helping my son figure out engineering to be able to come back, right? I don't even know as much about the company itself, but I want to support you because of the value that you're bringing to me, right? I think that multiplies many times over, both in terms of, like those specific instances, but even the exposure, right? You go to a place, you do some type of activity. The place where you did the activity, they report on it. They say, hey, Slay came in and they did this fantastic job, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone in their network now knows about you. And we all at this point are pretty comfortable with the notion of like network effects, right? So one person posts it, their community sees it. You go jump in the post, hey, if anyone would like for us to come do the same thing at their school or their place of work or their organization, we're open to it. As far as like the legal aspects of it, and this was kind of where the question got started, so there are two layers to it. This portion where you're investing in the community, you're not even talking about the campaign yet. You're just giving to the community. You're just building awareness. You're just getting more people to support what you're doing. So even if we were thinking about this on like on a time frame, right? If you want to raise capital by the end of this year, you be doing stuff right now to build that community up. And in the beginning stages of that, you're not talking about the campaign yet. You're just telling people about what you do. What's your mission? Who are you? What are you trying to accomplish? Trying to find folks who can help you to grow. So something that I always tell folks about the benefits of a community round is that it's the most magnificent marketing endeavor that most early stage companies could put together, because you're going to spend this large amount of time just marketing the business, just telling people about it and getting people excited. And they may not necessarily be someone who's going to be your customer, but in this particular scenario, it doesn't matter because you're cultivating their support for something other than being able to send them an invoice, right? 12 months from now, that's someone who can invest $500 in your company, and they can introduce your company to 10 other people who may do the same thing. You see how that math starts to multiply, right? So even in terms of like what you say, once you get to the point to where you are doing a campaign, the main thing you have to keep in mind legally is that you have to tell the truth, you know? And by telling the truth, well, one, you have to tell the truth, right? And even in the places where you embellish or you give projections, you still have to give those projections in the context of what you think can be true. And if it's a projection, you have to say, these are projections, right? So even just like, I mean, we see a lot of stuff the last couple of years with COVID on social. People promise very elaborate results, right? If you work with us, we'll do 1, 2, 3, or if you buy my course, all of these things will happen. And in a lot of cases, that's probably true, but in some cases, folks are just saying what they want people to hear, right? In terms of just being in line legally, the best practice is to be authentic, right? To be consistent with what you've actually done and what you legitimately, honestly think you can do, right? And to be able to show some support for that, right? So we'll make $2 million next year. You need to be able to show, here's what we did this month, here's what's happening coming up, here are, potential customers that we have to get us to that point. It doesn't sound like a ridiculous claim if you can prove it, right? So it doesn't have to be proven true already, but even as it relates to, what you think the ultimate exit opportunity will be. Again, you just have to frame it in the context of what's actually plausible, you know? So that's just sticking to authenticity.
And even just to chime in a little bit more on the strategy piece, crowdfunding is all about momentum, right? So in those early stages, you want to ensure that you're seeding, you're winding up before you swing, so to speak. So like in your case, it would make a whole lot of sense to have micro events where you could actually invite parents and show them what the mirror can actually do, like with their kids. And like, that could double as great content for social. And then you can even couple that with a countdown to a huge announcement. Stay tuned. Like there are a lot of different ways that you can do it. One thing that works out very well, though, kind of like I was mentioning, were those events. I've seen founders that have generated hundreds of thousands in a day because they really prepared and launched a strategic event. They brought stakeholders from their community, they had advocates that promoted it, and then they, crushed it in a day. Now, granted, it's a momentum thing, so day two is tough because you still got to follow that up. But you're off to a much better start when you take the time to build that foundation, and I think that speaks a lot to what Benny was talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So kind of building on, a lot of things that we just talked about, I like to break it into two pieces, right? Community and capital. Community, again, is all these people you need to believe in what you're doing, right? Just on a base level, I want you to succeed. Like I'm, as our grandparents say, I'm praying for you, right? Like I'm pulling for you. I'm in your corner. That's your community. Capital is, to make it plain, the money you need, right? Like what resources are necessary to get you from where you are now to where you're trying to go. So thinking about it in the context of a campaign or any fundraise, whether it be equity crowdfunding or Reg D, you're telling people if you give me X amount of money, I'm going to reach Y milestone, right? So if you give me $100,000, I use that $100,000 to develop this and to build that. And that's going to give us more access to customers, which will generate more revenue, which will position us to grow and compete and, on and on and on. But what resources, or you should, well, I guess that's what we'll get into, right? Capital are the resources that you need. So thinking around community, identify who believes in your mission. We can have in our mind who we want our community to be, right? But in reality, it's more so about who up until this point has shown you that they believe in what you're doing, and use those folks as an example of where are other people like this out there who believe in what I'm doing. So of course you have your friends and your family, but if what you're doing is in a space where, there's some nonprofits, so using impact as an example again, right? If you're doing something that's impact oriented, it's identifying who are the folks who have like a natural affinity towards that type of impact, right? So identifying pockets of people whose interests are in alignment with yours, right? Or finding pockets of people who maybe you've gone to events and done pitches and folks come up to you after and say like, oh, that was so inspirational, or, oh, you're working on something that I think is really interesting for, this industry. Wherever you're finding traction, wherever you're getting attention, wherever there are people who seem more than just, on a surface level supportive, you want to cultivate those particular individuals, but then you also want to try to identify other folks who fit a similar profile and begin the process of one, identifying them, but also beginning to engage those folks too, right? Similar, identify why they believe in your mission. Same thing. What about what you're doing gets people excited? What about what you're doing has helped you get through even the periods of time where you may not have been operating on your top level, right? When things have been tough, who and why have you been able to keep pushing? Those things you have to tap into and figure out how to take it from being like those small examples to a much larger similar group, gauge who can and will invest in your business venture. Going back to the notion of friends and family and even angel investors, like in the, wherever you live, right? You have to identify who supports you, but then you also have to have some understanding of how much they'll be able to support you, right? So a lot of the folks in the campaign are going to fall somewhere around like the average contribution, right? 500 to 1,000 maybe, right? And you need a lot of those, but you also need to sprinkle in some 5,000s and some 10,000s and hopefully some 20 or more, right? You need to gauge who those folks are and start the process of engaging them accordingly, right? So for the folks who, you know, they're probably going to come in at a lower level, you're doing more volume communication with them, right? You're trying to get them on a newsletter, you're reaching out to them via social, you're sending them emails. Someone who comes in on a higher level, you're trying to get to them more one-on-one, right? Trying to schedule a meeting with them or actually going to where they are, trying to get face-to-face, trying to get in front of them. But the entire thing about building the community, and it's very similar to what a lot of you are doing in terms of building a customer base, is that you identify who you're trying to sell to, and you make a lot of effort towards growing your potential, right? Your top of funnel, and then it comes down, right? You get so many people to engage, and then that leads to a certain amount of sales. With an equity crowdfunding campaign, it's a very similar thing. You want to be able to reach out to as many people who, again, believe in what you're doing, are inclined towards what you're doing, have the resources to support you. And from there, consistently get that information in front of them to educate them on, again, the company, the process, the investment, the outcome, right? And that spills over into capital. I think one of the many big issues that entrepreneurs have when they're raising capital is they don't really know how much they need. I'm pretty sure most of us know how much we will want. If you ask me like, oh, how much money you want? I could give you like a nice round number, right? And I could probably walk you through high level, how I would spend it, so forth and so on. But that wouldn't be my real number, right? That wouldn't be the real number again to get from point A to point B. And the reason why that's very important in a crowdfunding campaign is because, again, you're going to spend the entire campaign communicating who you are, and where you're going, right? It's going to be in your profile, it's going to be in your Form C, it's going to be in all your communications. Once you set the number for the campaign, say we were trying to raise, $1 million, right? Here, this goes into some of the technical aspects of a campaign. You have what's called a minimum and a maximum. So the maximum is the maximum amount that you want to raise in this campaign. That's your big target number. Let's just say that's $1 million. But you can set a minimum number lower than that. Your minimum is the minimum amount you have to raise in order to be able to get the capital. So if you donated to like a Kickstarter or some of the other forms of crowdfunding, you may be familiar with max and minimum. And the equity crowdfunding campaign is really important because, as Ryan was saying, it's all about momentum, right? You coming out of the gate trying to hit the minimum first, because you got to get to the minimum to be able to get the money at all. So you want to set the minimum at a level that you feel like you can reach, but you also want to set the minimum at a level where it's enough for you to be able to put that money to work and accomplish some goals, right? So if you say your max is $1 million and you say your minimum is 250,000, you want to make sure that if you only raise 250,000, that's enough for you to still carry on this mission, right? And get you to a point to where maybe, 8 to 12 months later, you do a new campaign, or at some point in the near future to continue raising. But you don't want to set your minimum so high that you can't reach it and you spend a bunch of weeks doing this campaign and you don't get any capital. But you also don't want to set it so low that if you hit the minimum amount and you don't get too far past it, you're put in a compromised position where now you have some money, but not enough money, and kind of keeping with that, telling a compelling story that inspires action, right? Again, what you set what your minimum and your maximum is. So now you have to like actually go out and effectively convey why you need $250,000. What are you going to do with it? Why would it make sense for you to hit all the way up to $1 million? What's the difference between what you will be able to do the further you get up the ladder in your campaign? You want to be able to communicate that in a way to where it keeps the momentum going. if people see like, oh, they're raising a whole bunch of money, they don't need my help, like it's almost as if you think about like on social media, if you have a really good post and a lot of people hit like, a lot of people are probably just passing by like, oh, they already have 50 likes, they don't need mine, right? And the equity crowdfunding campaign, you need to go in reverse. You need people to see like, oh, they've raised 50,000. $50,000 worth of people believe in this. Let me put my 500 in. They've reached 100. Like, oh, they doing really good, because you get to go on social and say like, hey, we reached a new milestone. Here's what we're able to do now. Like, you want to be able to always celebrate the progress and tie the progress to the mission, right? You don't want to get in a situation where people can feel like the fact that you're having some success in the campaign means that they get to like not care. All success should inspire people to be more inclined to help you. And that kind of goes into what we're saying about promoting your campaign and engaging with your community. The campaign is non-stop, and you're going to have a lot of stretches where it seems like nothing is really happening, meaning you can have one day where you get a ton of money to come in, and then you can have 2 weeks after that where it feels like nothing is happening. That's just part of the process. And you have to keep going. Like, you have to keep promoting and engaging on day one the same way on day 100. Like, it's just, and part of the reason for that is not only do you have to stay consistent, but you look at the stats on it, most of the contributions come in at the very beginning and at the very end, right? So you have to power through that middle section constantly, like we said before, educating people, building the community, getting folks to like understand why it's valuable to contribute to what you're doing. You have to take them through that slow dead period where folks are like, another email, another post, another text message, you have to get past all of that, because part of what the campaign requires is that, like any marketing, right? You just have to keep it going.
Hey, Benny, quick question. We got a question that came in via DM. I just want to make sure we can get to it before she potentially has to hop. But she wanted to know, are your assessments complimentary? Also, do you do full cycle crowdfunding campaign support? So do you tranche it out? Do you help with friends and family, and then help with the community, and then help with VCs and angel investors? And the last question, how long should the entire process take realistically to raise 250K to 500,000? Happy to
Um,
restate any of that if it wasn't clear.
no, I followed it all, but I'm gonna let you answer the last question.
Go ahead.
So the first question is, so we do an intro session that's an hour, and then we do 3 60-minute sessions as follow-up. The first session is free. The 3 60-minute sessions, there's a fee for those. For uh the support throughout the campaign, so yes, we do support pre-campaign as well as during. To be 100% honest, and I can say this, is I actually responded to a client yesterday about this. Once you get to the campaign, 99% of the legal work has been done, because it's necessary in order for you to be able to like actually pass SEC muster to be able to launch the campaign. So we do the vast majority of the work before you go live, but we also provide support throughout the campaign if things come up, as well as after the fact.
And
In terms of time, I mean, it varies. I mean, I feel like you could
yeah,
probably give better bands, but if you have a huge audience already, if you have a ton of momentum already, if you are raising a Reg D round as part of the Reg CF round, meaning if you're a startup and you're raising capital from a VC fund and you're doing the crowdfunding that's attached to it, it can happen really fast because you have a ton of momentum already and everybody just knows to come invest and you get it done. There are other instances where, I mean, it's just like a really slow grind for 3 months before it starts rolling for people.
I'll say this. When you consider the quickest of the quick and the slowest of the slow, I would average it out at 6 months. especially in this market, right?
Yeah.
It's harder, just given where things are at within the investing landscape for crowdfunding campaigns. Not to say it's still not a good option because you can accept a check from anyone, but I would realistically say 6 months without
Yeah.
example.
I would say 6, and I mean, I said, I feel like I said this like earlier in the presentation. I think it's a 12-month process. You know, the actual
Not even.
campaign itself may
Yeah,
only be 3 to 6 months, but there are a lot of things that you need to do before you even get to what we call testing the waters.
right.
Meaning, again, like, you have to build this community, you have to build this audience, and once the campaign is live, you're on the clock. So you
Right.
can't really build a community during the campaign. During the campaign, you're trying to convert the community into investors. So that's kind of where your focus is. If the campaign is going well, of course, your community will grow because you're getting a lot of exposure, and people who invest are now telling other people. So you do get some growth in that sense, but your focus as CEO is going to be on actually converting whoever you're getting engagement from into an investor. So I would say you'll probably spend 6 to 9 months just leading up to it, making sure you know you're you're getting enough exposure to then launch this campaign. And I think that that's true not just for equity crowdfunding. I think that's true if you were raising from VC, or if you were raising from
Yeah.
some angels, or
Yeah.
if you're going out to apply for a grant, that is coming up. There's a long lead time in between, when it's actually the moment where the check is cut versus all of the little things you have to do to be able to qualify for it.
And let me just chime in and say this is stuff that you're going to need to do, that you're going to need to do for your company anyway. You're
Yeah.
always going to need to be adding to your Rolodex. You're always going to need to be developing relationships with people that can help take your business to the next level. So it is vital. But if I'm just going to be 100% honest, and Benny, forgive me if I'm being too real here, the fastest way to get capital is probably through an accelerator, I would say. Like, you apply, you get accepted, and then you get the investment at the end of the program, or it might be sprinkled in through the program. So I'm just keeping it 100% real with any of y'all on the call that are thinking about the fastest way to get money. The best way, of course, is to build that audience, that community, that network. The thing is, with a lot of those accelerators, they may offer grants, and that's cool. But the big ones that are putting in real money are taking equity out of your company, right? So all that said, fast doesn't always mean it's the best. Sometimes fast requires you to give away more, and you have to think about that. Sometimes taking things slow and steady, it may take longer, it may be arduous, but it would ensure that you'll have a lot more control over the stake and the direction of your business. So I just wanted to make that clear and just add that as well.
Yeah, for sure. And even I play a little bit of devil's advocate here on that because, I mean, one, fast is relative, right? Like, something may feel faster because there's a deadline for it. The deadline is in 2 weeks. I apply, either I get it or I don't, right? But in order to get into an accelerator, you spend, unless the accelerator or incubator or whatever the program is specifically geared to idea stage activity, most of the time they're going to want to see traction, a business, something in place before you even qualify for that. So it's still you spending that time, right? Because in that time where you're getting ready to, one, apply for an accelerator, but more than anything, be attractive to them to want them to let you in. There's a ton of work that goes into it. I think one of the major benefits of crowdfunding is that of the different ways that you can get money, is probably, I won't say the only one, but it's the one where the activity that you have to go through pays dividends whether you raise capital or not. And by that, I mean the amount of time you spend building out this community, the amount of time you spend getting people to even think about investing in your company, that's exposure that, sort of like he was saying before, you need anyway. Even if those folks aren't necessarily your potential customer, all exposure gets you closer to a potential customer, right? So, you may get in front of someone who's not your actual customer for your company, but maybe someone in their family is, or maybe a friend of theirs is. So all of those, many efforts that you go through to be able to build out that community, whether you raise or not, pays dividends. Whereas you could spend, and this is pretty common, folks spend, 2-3 years trying to raise VC, where they reach out to 1,000 different VCs, right? So you're constantly emailing folks like, hey, here's my company, here's my pitch deck. Can I have 5 minutes, right? You think about all the time that goes into reaching out to this large number of VCs, and you may not even fit in their profile. So, like, how much benefit does that effort necessarily pay versus if you spent that exact same amount of time building out your community, Like, and that's just a function of, again, it's not for everyone, right? Like, one path may be better for one person on the call, another path may be better for someone else. But just in terms of like thinking through the pros and the cons of the effort, I would say yes, it takes a tremendous amount of effort. It could absolutely drag on for, a year or more to get you to the number that you actually need. But I would say that the things that you do in that period of time to like actually get to your minimum, your maximum, will pay dividends along the way, in ways that, hitting up every VC whose email you can get a hold to may not necessarily.
Absolutely.
So I know we've kind of pushing towards time. So kind of run through the last couple slides. I mean, a lot of what you'll see on the last few slides are things that we talked about before, but one exercise that I do a lot of myself, just for whatever I'm doing, as well as any clients I talk to, is I try to get them to like have very clean answers to questions that are like critical to what they're doing, right? And it's not coming up with an answer to the question as part of your pitch. It's not, like your one liner. It's really for yourself, like things that you internally, as the leader of this organization, need to know. And specifically as it relates to a crowdfunding campaign, does your community know you, right? Like, the people who you want to invest in you, the people who, you want on your cap table, the people who you're going to spend all this time reaching out to, like, do they know who you are? If the answer to that is yes, then you have a very strong advantage coming out of the gate to putting this campaign together. If the answer to that is no, that doesn't mean that you can't be successful at running the campaign, but that means you're going to have to spend, like we were talking about before, a lot of time building up that awareness of, first, who you are, second, what your company does, third, what this campaign is doing, and fourth, everything else that kind of follows from there, right? They need to know who you are, what you do, and be deeply, have a deep understanding of what's going on. How much money do you need? We just talked about that a second ago. Saying, I'd be cool with, $500,000. It's really hard to raise $500,000 when you tell people, oh, I'd be cool with it. You know what I mean? Like, you want to be very specific, at 250, we can do 1, 2, 3. At 400, we can do XYZ. But if we hit 500,000, then we rocket ship. We do this and that and that and that. That's much more compelling, right? I'm much more willing to, one, invest. And if I'm going to invest a little bit more when you as the founder have a crystal clear understanding of the numbers, right? Anytime you're trying to get people to depart with their money, they want to make sure you have a firm understanding of what you're going to do with it. And at some point, how they'll get their money back, right? Has your story inspired action up to this point? Again, if everywhere you go and you talk, people get excited and people begin to do things to help you, big and small, you're already rolling in the right direction. If you haven't really had that experience where you tell people what you're doing and they feel compelled to like help push you along, you have to begin to like reshape that story. And it may not be because, your business concept isn't there, or you may even be very successful with your customers. But in terms of actually running a campaign, the story has to inspire more than your customer level. It has to inspire people even beyond folks who know who you are, right? Like, at some point, you're going to need to start getting investments from people who just look at your profile and say like, oh, this is a really great opportunity. I like what they're doing. I believe in that. They go through and look at your campaign materials, things you posted on social or in the Q&A. They learn more about you. That story is what's going to get them to invest in ways that, you know, they would not have, even if they necessarily knew who you were, like on base level, but they haven't been inspired by your story, you know? Can you sustain a long campaign? Like we said before, I mean, yeah, it could happen in 90 days, but more likely than not, it's going to take 9 months, 12 months. I've seen people roll multiple campaigns. You know, I've seen people run campaigns for almost 3 years, you know, back to back to back, just to get to, you know, well, not just to get to their number, but to hit a number, keep going, hit another number, keep going, and then hit like the big campaign where it functions more like a seed round or Series A, you know? And that, again, that entire time you're running the company and you're also running this campaign. So, I mean, the time just begins to stack up. And last, what is the exit plan for investors? So going back, they want to know that you know exactly how much you need. But more than that, they want to hear how they're going to get their money back. And it needs to be very understandable, very clean, very clear. With the crowd, you're dealing with your cousin, your uncle, your teacher from high school, uh, you know, if you run like a coffee shop or something like that, customers who come in every day and who like, you know, your chocolate chip cookies, whatever the case may be, they aren't sophisticated investors. They aren't, you know, running models on, if I put this amount in and I need a certain percentage out and this is how you're going to grow. These are just regular, ordinary folks. If they put $500 into your company, they want to know how they're going to get 10% back in 5 years. It may not happen. And again, going back to the legalities of what you can say, yes, you have to tell people there's no guarantee. You absolutely could lose your full investment. But here's my plan of how to grow this company and get acquired for 3 times revenue, or here's how I plan to grow this company to eventually go public, or here's how I plan to grow this company to begin to cash flow at a level to where I can kick out 5% dividends every year. Whatever your ultimate return is, or whatever your ultimate, uh, whatever you ultimately want. Sorry, I'm trying to phrase this the right way. You need to know how you're going to get investors out, right? And you want to be able to explain that in a way where they can easily understand that and say yes to investing, right? You want them to say yes to putting their money in because they understand how they'll get it out. So, I mean, you've heard me mention test the waters a few times. I promise you, I'll briefly get into some of the legalities and some of the technical stuff that goes on. Test the waters. So we talked before about equity crowdfunding starting in 2016. I think maybe 2020, 2021, somewhere in there. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
No, you're good.
Somewhere I think 2021, they made some changes to the rules that allow you to do what's called test the waters. Test the waters means you can launch a profile page and start the process of telling people about the campaign, but you haven't officially launched yet, right? So it's almost like an in-between period where you can test the waters to see if there's enough interest in your campaign for you to fully commit to go all in, right? So think about it like this. You can put your profile page together. You can, well, so let's kind of go through what you see in the circle. So the founding agreements, obviously you need to have that in place with the company just in general, right? If you're a solo founder, not so important, but you know, if you have partners, other shareholders, there needs to be some, you know, operating agreement in place or bylaws if you're a corporation, but you need like that initial corporate governance in place, right? If feel like I was about to jump right into making it confusing. So you need the corporate governance in place. The campaign profile is, you know, I'm not sure if I would guess most of you have seen a campaign profile page before, but in case you haven't, the profile page is where you have basically like your pitch deck saying who the company is, who your customers are, what success you've had so far, some light financials, some light projections. It's just the story, it's the narrative, it's the page where everyone's going to go and learn more about what you're doing, right? In this testing the waters phase, you don't need a lot of the extra stuff that you'll see, like the trademark search and even financials at that point, the due diligence. Testing the waters is just very light. You know, everyone who's on the call right now could go launch a page on WeFunder with, you know, like the basic profile page and start sending it around to see if anybody's like excited to invest.
Yeah.
Transferring from the testing the waters phase to actually launching a campaign is where you really get into some of the more I guess, technical aspects of it. So like a charter restatement, if you're a corporation and you're raising equity, you're going to need to like change your articles of incorporation to be prepared for the raise. Or if you're an LLC and you've decided you want to convert into a corporation as part of the raise, again, you do a restatement to convert the company into the corporation. And there's just, you know, some filings and paperwork that go along with that. Um, Similar with the fundraising documents. In testing the waters, you are going to have to like determine what fundraising mechanism you're using, whether that's a SAFE or a convertible note or a revenue loan, or even if you've decided that you're ready to sell equity. Um, I include the trademark search just because I feel like at this point, when you're running a campaign, you're going to get so much more exposure that your brand protection does need to be in place if it's not already. Just because, you know, at this point, you're inviting a lot of people to see what you're doing, right? So with that, heightens the ability for people to begin to infringe on, you know, any trademarks you might have in place. Uh, the due diligence review, I think that's something more internal for crowdfunding. And the due diligence review is just making sure you have all your loose ends tied, you making sure that, you know, you have everything together, because you're going to be spending so much time devoted to this campaign that you want to make sure that the actual, your organization itself is intact. And then the company financials. So the types of financials you need depends on the size of the raise.
Right.
On the most minimal level, you'll need to produce financials yourself, and you can self-certify the financials. But I think that's like under what,
It's
like
under
120,
250. Yeah.
250. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything over that, then for a first-time raise, you need reviewed financials. Reviewed meaning an actual CPA needs to like look over your financials and review it. And then over a certain amount, or if you're a repeat raiser, you need to do an audit. An audit is a real big whatever.
Well, Benny, I appreciate it. We're getting close to time. I just want to make sure if in case anyone has any questions, they can just quickly ask. I know we're getting, deep into side of some of the legal stuff. Does anyone have any quick questions before Benny dives into the slide about the process, about the legality, anything?
Um, I do. This is Lori. I'm from Care Beauty. How are you, Benny? Thank you for your time. Um, it sounds like just launching on WeFunder was fairly easy if that's the platform you would choose. But you did make an indication that you have to change your articles of incorporation and things like that. So are those things that you would usually get a legal advice before launching something like this, or is it that if does the WeFunder or these different platforms, do they sort of take care of that within?
Yeah, so they don't take care of it, but they tend to do a really good job of helping founders understand what governance they need to have in place, right? So I gotta use an example. If you're set up as a Delaware corp right now, right, and you go and raise, set up to raise capital on WeFund and you issue a SAFE, in that situation, I don't think that there would be any corporate governance that you need to change just because you aren't in the process of getting ready to issue stock and et cetera, et cetera. That scenario is fairly clean, right? But let's say in that same scenario, you're set up as a Delaware LLC, and you've decided that as part of raising capital, you want to make a conversion from an LLC into a corporation. At that point, you do have to, I would say you should use an attorney, because particular conversion can be very complicated, particularly as it relates to like getting ready for a campaign. But in that same scenario, you go to WeFund and you start having a conversation with who your project manager would be. They walk you through some of the questions to get you to the point to say like, hey, you probably make sense to make a conversion. And at that point, they do refer you. I mean, depending if you're
Right.
talking to WeFund, they refer you to me or someone like me, right? Like I'm not the
Got
only
it.
attorney that they work with, but they say
Mhm.
like, hey, you should, similar with financials, right? And financials is something that probably is an issue that needs to be handled much more consistently. So if you need someone to review the financials, they'll give you recommendations of CPAs who typically work with them for that type of
Right.
activity.
I have one more question. Ryan, do we have time for that?
We have time for one more question, but then we're gonna have to jump pretty soon. Got to get to the next.
Okay. Okay. Um, did I forget my question? Oh, God. Oh, you mentioned during your talk, Benny, that some people who actually raise a little bit, then a little bit more, then a little bit more. And I've actually never heard that before. So if you're looking to raise $1 million, you're kind of saying to get your toes wet, you may want to start at something like 250 and then raise it after you get to that. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, technically. All
Like
right, so
stepping it up based on your successes. Okay.
yeah, you can. So the rule is within 12 months, you can raise up to $5 million, right? So that's the high mark within the course of a year. Strategically, for some companies, let's go back down to the million. You're really trying to raise $1 million, right? Strategically, for some companies, it makes sense to start with raising 250. And they take that 250 and grow, and maybe 6 months later come back, kick the campaign in gear again, raise another, let's say 250. So now you're at a half. Use that next 250, continue to grow, come back maybe 6 months later. Well, now a year has passed, you're still under the $5 million high mark. So you can come back for that third campaign and now raise up to $5 million, right? And what you've done, you've developed the muscle memory of like actually running a campaign. You have the compounding benefit of like all that time spent building the community out and having that success of 1, 2 successful campaigns, and the actual progress that the company has made during that period of time. So yeah, you absolutely can do it like in one shot in the course of a year, raise, whatever your number is, but there is an approach where, and what we were talking about is just like the amount of time that it could take. It can take longer if you keep raising. I think that was the point we were trying to make there. But yeah, you can do it all at once in one raise, or you can break it into pieces over the course of multiple raises.
Okay, great. Thank you for answering my questions.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it, Lori. Benny, I really, really appreciate the time, man. We are gonna have to jump because we are at time. Benny, would it be possible for you to link the assessment and maybe drop your LinkedIn in the chat? A couple folks wanted to connect and learn more.
Sure. Yeah, I can. Can I email it to you and you send it, because I have
Yeah.
to. I don't
Actually,
know if I have the slide
that works a lot better.
in a link to share it easily.
Yeah, that's a good idea. All right. You go ahead and drop your LinkedIn.
Yeah, and I'll also include my email. Feel free. If you have any questions, shoot me an email. I'm usually pretty quick about responding. So
Everyone, thank you so much for being here in attendance. Benny, we really appreciate it. I'm sorry, man, we just kind of ran on time. You have one of the more difficult sections to kind of talk about because there's process and then there's legal. Those could really be two separate calls, so we kind of had to push into one. So I think we might have to bring you back. But a lot of folks had interest. Thank you so much, everyone, for reaching out. This is your guy as it relates to staying legally compliant and understanding the process needed to successfully raise. I've worked closely with him, so I recommend him 10 times out of 10. We will see you all next week on our call with the Macy's funding arm, Spur Pathways. Our contact Byron's going to be coming out to speak, so you won't want to miss that. But thank you so much. Take care and have a great weekend. Happy
Yeah, have
Friday.
a great weekend. Thank
All right.
y'all.
Take care.